Now, I've always found this to be an interesting subject because, of course, in the Bible, we have the idea of nephilim, which nephilim are giants. And, there's the back and forth on whether or not, giant skeleton remains were found. The Smithsonian having to admit that they had found giant skeletons. They were trying to hide them. There's all of that. But let's just talk about legends. Let's just talk about time and history and memorial and things that we see. Now, according to the Greeks, in their histories, their religion, their myth, as we call them today, they had giants. These people had the gods having sex with humans, mortals, and having men of great renown, as the Bible calls them, the Christian Bible calls them. And these were the giants of the day. The Greeks had them in their mythologies. The Orishas had giants in the Ifa mythology. And I shouldn't call them mythology because these were people's religions. But all throughout the world, ancient people have always talked about giants. They've always talked about giants. So what is my thought process on that? Well, if we go even beyond that, the Sumerians talked about how the Anunnaki were big, tall, giant-sized figures. And even in the descriptions on the clay pottery and the clay tablets, they show that the Anunnaki were like 15, 18 feet tall. When we look at certain construction throughout the world, ancient construction, you have these giant steps and giant doorways. Who the hell was going through them? So we have that. But even if there was nothing of a Nephilim, there was nothing of, the Anunnaki and the gods having sex with men and women, let's just think about biology for a minute. Let's think about it. Now, when we look at ancient times, we always like to think people were smaller. In our most recent 12,000 years, most people were smaller than what we are today. But if you go back to the earth being more pure, look at the creatures that we have found skeletal remains, the dinosaurs, for instance. They were giant, huge creatures. All these creatures were based on how they lived and what they ate. The earth was more pure. We didn't have all this population. We didn't have all this pollution. We didn't have, processed foods. People ate more pure foods. And imagine a time frame where there were less people on the planet, less methane, less things of that nature, and people generally ate from the land that reproduced itself. Just as here in Georgia, a peach today does not have the flavor that a peach had or the nutrients that a peach had when I was a kid. So just biologically, I think people have always been bigger, and then we shrunk, and now we're starting to get bigger again. Just my thoughts on it. But yeah, I agree. They must